Hello and welcome to this presentation on greyhound racing in Great Britain, where I'm asking, does it provide adequate dog welfare, through a brief review of the industry and stakeholder perspectives. And here is an overview of what I'll be covering. So starting with some background and a little history. Greyhound racing in the UK evolved from hare coursing and head-to-head straight-line races in the 18th century, becoming genuinely popular from 1926, when the first professional track opened at Bellevue in Manchester, and where the dogs raced anti-clockwise around oval tracks up to 1100 metres long. At its peak in the late 1950s, it was attracting over 30 million people a year, gathering at 110 licensed tracks and possibly another 200 plus unlicensed ones. Now, attendance is less than 2 million per year, and there are only 22 racetracks left, 19 licensed by the industry regulatory body, the Greyhound Board of Great Britain or GBGB, and 3 independent tracks. The GBGB features a lot, so it's worth remembering those initials. With the internet, the emphasis changed from a spectator sport to a mechanism for online global gambling, which has stabilised the decline of the sport since 2010. 7 countries currently have active commercial greyhound racing, with a further 21 where it occurs non-commercially. Touted as the 6th most popular spectator sport in the UK, racing takes place most days of the year. Each race has up to 8 dogs competing, and as of January 2018, the weekly racing schedule for the GB stadia increased to 74 meetings, requiring on average 5,772 dogs to compete every week. And that was an increase of over 60% from 2017. Now these dogs come from approximately 6,000 to 7,000 total registrations each year, and that's out of a pool of a total of around 15,000 greyhound owners, 880 trainers, 4,000 kennel staff and 860 racecourse officials. The industry is largely left to self-regulate. The GBGB is responsible for regulation of greyhound racing at its 19 tracks in England, Scotland and Wales, and welfare is protected by the Welfare of Racing Greyhound Regulations 2010. The sport is overseen by the Independent UK Accreditation Service or UCAS, and the 3 independent tracks are licensed by their local authorities. Within the GBGB, the separate Greyhound Regulatory Body or GRB sets standards for racing integrity but not for welfare. Now the GBGB was created in 2009 following Lord Donohue's 2007 governmental report, which highlighted many welfare shortfalls. This in itself followed pressure on the industry after a series of scandals, and in particular a public outcry over the expose of the killing and burial of thousands of retired greyhounds in County Durham in 2006. Now, the vast majority of money in the industry comes through gambling, with £2.6 billion staked annually on live greyhound racing in the UK, most of it off course and online, and bookmakers make some £250 million profit per annum. In 2020, the UK government controversially gave the GBGB £1 million. Now this was part of DDCMS's Sport Winter Survival Package to support major spectator sports in light of the pandemic. In addition, the Treasury takes about £60 million per year from the industry in taxes. Moving on to issues. Now in 2018, Professor Andrew Knight was commissioned by Grady Exploitations, a charity which campaigns for stronger protection laws and for gambling on dogs to be illegal, to look into welfare and particularly the injuries in greyhound racing, and the following are his key findings. The racing lifespan of a greyhound is short, usually from around 15 months to 5 years, with the average only being 2 to 3 years old. There are unfortunately no data for dogs who disappear before this when not considered good enough to race. Those that make it will usually race weekly, until they either die on track or are made redundant when too slow or injured. Historically, many have disappeared at retirement with unknown fates, and a government report in 2015 noted that 3,700 dogs were unaccounted for. However, Since 2018, retirement and injury data for GBGB registered dogs is recorded and voluntarily published online, and most recent industry figures, as shown here, indicate over 90% having a life after racing, with the vast majority being rehomed. In terms of kennelling and husbandry, concerns are wide-ranging as listed here. A review by the Dogs Trust in 2015 revealed common breaches of the most basic standards of hygiene and cleanliness and below standard facilities. Dogs often have limited socialisation, leading to fear and anxiety which can be passed on to offspring, making them difficult to rehome. In 2017, 27% of greyhounds that died or were killed were designated unsuitable for rehoming, though, as you can see here, industry data shows this dropped to 83 dogs or 1.1% in 2019. During transportation to tracks, greyhounds should be able to stand at full height and be able to turn around, yet the GBGB rules of racing requirement do not allow for this. Looking at injuries, greyhounds' great speed and acceleration puts considerable stress on their limbs and makes them prone to a range of injuries. This is especially true when cornering, where effective body weight increases by 71% due to gravity and centripetal acceleration, and all four limbs experience an increase in peak force of around 65%. Most injuries occur in the left foreleg, which is used as a pivot, and the right hind leg, which is used as the primary propulsive force. Younger and less developed dogs and heavier male dogs tend to suffer the most. Bends also risk interference, as the greyhound seeks to dissipate excessive forces by slowing down or widening their curve radius, and this increases risk of collision. One study concluded 68% of injuries and 75% of fatalities occurred from accidents at the first bend when congestion is at a maximum. Nearly all tracks now have a sandy surface, creating faster racing but significantly increased injury risk over grass, as does a surface that is too dry, too wet, hard or unstable. Common injuries greyhounds are prone to are fractures, often from traumas of direct contact during collision, but stress or fatigue fractures may also result due to excess forces which are rarely seen in other types of dogs. Muscle injuries from sprains to tears are also common, particularly around the elbow, shoulder and pelvis, along with tendon and ligament injuries. The right hind limb tends to be the most affected, though as you can see here, foot, wrist and hock injuries are frequent too. The report made several recommendations to help reduce injuries, such as straight tracks, better surfaces, improved starting box design, safety pads on the rails, shorter races of less than 300 metres, and better veterinary facilities. And now to look at some stakeholder positions, starting with the UK government. And following the 2007 Donahue report, the government committed to introduce welfare regulations for standards at racing, including compulsory vet attendance, microchipping and better recording of injuries. The Welfare of Racing Greyhound Regulations 2010 were reviewed by DEFRA in 2016, concluding that the model of enforcement was robust and even possibly applicable to other areas of animal welfare. However, it's worth highlighting minimum and racetracks here, meaning many areas remained outside the scope of the regulations. Accordingly, areas for improvement and further action were identified. Specifically, standards at trainers' kennels and transparency around injury and retirement rates, which GBGB has to some degree now addressed. In addition, the microchipping of Dogs England Regulations 2015 has also helped with traceability. The GBGB's main aims are to regulate greyhound racing, develop the sport commercially, and guide its continued growth and development. It promotes greyhound racing as a fun, family-friendly and accessible pastime open to newcomers who will marvel at the speed and athleticism of greyhounds doing what they do best. From a welfare perspective, in 2018, GBGB launched an 8-point Greyhound Commitment Manifesto to demonstrate a responsible, caring and well-run industry. For example, stipulating using 75% of the funding received from the betting industry to support animal welfare. and it also addressed the need for better veterinary facilities. Since 2019, the GBGB voluntarily publishes retirement and injury data and demands high standards of welfare from stakeholders. And also in 2019, it published a new code of practice for the operation and management of residential greyhound kennels, addressing some of the issues in both the 2016 DEFRA review and in Professor Knight's report, properly codifying kennel standards and best practices for the first time, including mental health and guidelines on environmental enrichment, exercise, nutrition and dental care. Indeed, failure by trainers to meet the minimum standards could now lead to an offence under the GBGB rules of racing. In September 2020, it launched a new greyhound retirement scheme, which sees owners and the GBGB committing a £400 at initial registration to help with rehoming costs on retirement. Bookmakers have long been an integral and essential part of greyhound racing. As such, some bookies own tracks themselves and are happy to run them at losses in the knowledge that they will make all the money back from online gambling. Most, though not all, make voluntary contributions towards welfare through the industry's British Greyhound Racing Fund levy, and this was bolstered following negotiations with government as part of the 2018 Greyhound commitment. The Bookmakers Afternoon Betting Service, or BAGS, accounts for over 99% of all bets staked on British greyhound racing. Their meetings from 20 tracks are televised to betting shops and streamed online to betting markets worldwide. Racing starts early and are attended by only a handful of people. The BAGS greyhounds are the most exploited and abused of all racing greyhounds, costing on average just £100 and commonly owned by a trainer or the tracks themselves. They're afforded very little in the way of welfare, and if injured or too slow, can be as dispensable as their price tags. There are about 1,200 rescue and rehoming charities in the country. The main greyhound adoption organisation is the Retired Greyhound Trust, or RGT, in part funded by the British Greyhound Racing Fund levy, but mostly reliant on public donations. In 2016, 5,500 greyhounds were rehomed, 4,000 by the RGT and the rest by independent organisations, and mostly through direct relationships with owners and trainers. The organisations have campaigned for many years to improve welfare standards in greyhound racing, and most take the position that dogs should not suffer or die for entertainment or profit of the industry. Greyhounds on rehoming are likely to have health problems, and that means high costs for the charities that have to be picked up by them, alongside the additional time and resources required for rehabilitation and rehoming, noting many racing greyhounds will never have lived in a home environment before. This is a significant drain on their resources, especially in the current pandemic where normal funding streams are reduced and the government has refused to support the charities despite providing emergency funding to the racing industry. And now some conclusions and recommendations. GBGB's preferred image that greyhound racing is a fun, family-friendly and accessible pastime with the dogs doing what they do best would seem somewhat disingenuous. The reality is that the vast majority of the races have a sole purpose to supply a betting product for national and international gamblers, exploiting the dogs while making huge profits for the bookmakers. Having said that, there have been significant improvements in welfare since 2010. Racetrack kennelling, veterinary support, microchipping and traceability, recording and publishing of injury and retirement data, the 2019 Code of Practice for Improvements in Residential Kennelling, and the latest attempts to support post-retirement rehoming are all of course welcome. Indeed, industry data would suggest that the fates of greyhounds on completion of racing are improving, but concerns undoubtedly remain with those not making the grade and with the prevalence of injuries. As a self-regulating industry, greyhound racing will likely continue to prioritise profit over dog welfare and do just enough as required to survive. The sport remains compromised by the powerful vested interests of the bookmakers, meaning that without radical changes it will continue to operate unethically, while others are largely left to pick up the pieces. So, some recommendations. 1. In the short term, make reporting of all injuries and deaths from GBGB tracks a statutory requirement with better provision at independent tracks, and implement key recommendations from Professor Knight's 2018 report to make racing less dangerous. 2. The government should reconsider self-regulation in the industry and stop supporting it financially. Rather, it should provide much needed support to the welfare charities who are left funding the consequences. And 3. Consideration should now be given to phasing out greyhound racing in the UK. There are so many other ways people can bet, and ethically it no longer feels justifiable to continue animal suffering and ultimately dying for entertainment, sport or gambling profit.